kind of funny. I was thinking about it. The digital LSAT, it seems new now, but 5-10 years from now, it's going to be the norm. And I'm going to be that old guy who's saying, I took the LSAT back when it was on paper and pencil, this newfangled digital LSAT contraption that's internet connected with interactivity. And this is just version 1.0. So all of those tech issues you saw with the LSAT in July, they're going to work out the kinks eventually. It's a Tuesday night, and for some reason, you're spending your summer evening devoted to studying for the LSAT, which I understand, honestly. The LSAT is an important exam. It's the number one factor in your law school admission process. And so it's good of you to be here tonight. It's good of you to be focused on digital LSAT prep, because the fall is the first time the LSAT is going fully digital in North America. July was a pilot run. Half of test takers got the digital format, half got the paper and pencil format. LSAT chose for you, and you didn't get any advance notice. And by the way, July LSAT scores are coming back August 28th, which is just about 2 weeks away from today. So those of you who took the July LSAT, I hope you rocked it. I hope things turn out well for you when scores come back in 2 weeks. And although canceling will give you a free retake on a future LSAT administration, I still suggest not canceling unless your score was embarrassingly low. Because if it was decent, you might as well keep it on record. Although, of course, you can retake it in September, October, or November. You don't know that you'll necessarily do better, although I hope that you do. One question I've been getting a lot lately about the July LSAT is, can you use your free retake on the September or October LSATs? And unfortunately, you can't use it on the September LSAT specifically. In fact, the September LSAT registration deadline has already passed, but you can take it in October or November. And although you could register for October now, having not yet canceled the July LSAT, LSAC will give you a free retake. They will refund you for the October LSAT if you want to use your free credit from having canceled the July LSAT. So that's just a little bit of bureaucratic rule wrangling that I wanted to get out of the way, because that is a thing that was recently just announced. Now, if you are planning on taking the LSAT in October or November, I would recommend that you register ASAP, even though the deadline for the October LSAT registration is not until September 10th, because for some reason, LSAC has not made that many test centers available for the fall. I don't know why. Maybe it has something to do with the digital LSAT transition, but register now. Already in New York, there's not a single test center available for 200 miles. I've heard the same about Boston and some other American cities, although I did hear that Toronto has a number of test centers available. But regardless, wherever you are, after this call, go on LSAC's site and see what's available. If you have not already registered, do so as soon as possible, because you don't want the stress of having the ambiguity around where your test center will ultimately be. So that's just some quick housekeeping stuff. Now, the agenda for tonight, in all seriousness, is, of course, discussing the digital LSAT and specifically taking your questions about digital LSAT prep. I do have a walkthrough in mind just to quickly show you what it looks like if you haven't already seen it. And what I will be walking through is specifically the familiarization tool on LSAC's website at familiar.lsac.org. That is pretty much your one-stop shop right now for looking at what the digital LSAT looks like. Right now, there are 3 tests in the digital LSAT format, tests 71, 73, and 74. And they keep saying they're going to add more in the lead up to the fall. They haven't added any additional tests yet, but they say it's on their website, and at some point they will. But for now, you've got those 3 tests available to walk through in the digital LSAT format. And I recommend doing so you can familiarize yourself with the various annotation tools and other features of the digital LSAT. Don't do this on the computer. Don't do it on a smartphone. It's especially not smartphone friendly. Do it on a tablet. The digital LSAT will specifically be on a Microsoft Surface Go, but any old tablet will do. You can use an iPad. You can use a Samsung. You can use an Amazon Fire tablet as well. Again, in Microsoft Surface Go 10 inch is what they'll be using, but any 10-inch tablet would be a good substitute. And so if your friends or family or your parents have one, borrow theirs just for an afternoon or two so you can walk through it. And the Amazon Fire HD10 is only $150. and I've put the link in the chat here. I would recommend getting it, and you can always return it afterwards if you decide that it's not for you and you don't really want to keep it long-term after your LSAT prep. A couple of quick things I want you to be thinking about in general when it comes to the digital LSAT. It is different, of course, to do LSAT questions on a screen versus doing them on paper. And it's different doing it on a tablet than doing it on a computer. And so use a tablet, use a stylus. You can get an Amazon Basics stylus for about $10 or so, and you will be using a stylus on the digital LSAT if you like. You can also use your finger, but something to be ready for. It is a little bit different. The other big thing I want you to know, if you take away nothing else from this session tonight, is that you cannot draw freehand on the tablet. You cannot write on it on the screen with your stylus the way that you could write on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil. And so practice like it's game day. Use scratch paper. On the digital LSAT, you will get scratch paper. You will get a booklet of about 12 to 14 pages. It's going to be that newsprint style material, similar to what you took the SAT on, similar to what the old paper LSAT was like. And so if you want to be really extreme about your prep, you could actually get newsprint to use for your scratch paper. And I'm putting the link to some newsprint scratch paper in the chat as well, if you want to truly mimic it, because it is thinner, it is cheaper material than your standard white 8.5 by 11 paper that you print things on, for example. And so if you want to mimic what it would be like to potentially erase too much or write too vigorously and tear a hole in the paper and get used to avoiding that in the future, you could use some newsprint. The other big thing, and I'll show you this on the LSAT site, is that on the digital LSAT, you can only see one question at a time. This is much different, of course, than on the paper version, where you have a 2-page spread for logic games, you have a 2-page spread for reading comprehension, and you can see the whole grouping of questions at once. And to answer the question on pencils, initially LSAC said that you could only use a pen, but they since changed their policy and you can also use a pencil, despite the fact that it's a digital LSAT. Your stylus will have a stylus tip on one end to use on the tablet, and it will have a pen in black ink on the other end. But you can also bring pencils and bring erasers to use as well for your scratch paper, depending upon your preference. Now, with reading on a tablet screen and being able to see only one question at a time, it's good to get used to narrowing your field of vision and getting used to seeing only one thing at a time and clicking around between different parts of grouped material. And so I recommend you get used to reading dense material on screen and that you get used to reading complex material on screen as well. So there are two specific tools I recommend to help you get faster and better at reading on a screen and you're getting quicker overall. They're called phrasereader.com and spreeder.com. And I'm sharing the links in the chat here so that you can take a look at them. And I also want to briefly show you what they look like, because it is something that's worth exploring. And in my courses, the live online masterclasses and the weekend masterclasses, I walk through this a bit as well. But here, basically, I've taken phrasereader.com. I've taken LSAC's press release trumpeting how well the July digital LSAT went, despite the various tech snafus that happened with tablets running out of battery and proctors forgetting styluses and such. So I just thought it'd be funny to put that in here. And we can parse this text and display it at various speeds. So here I'm displaying it at 300 words per minute, which is, I think, a fairly reasonable speed. And you see I'm narrowing my field of vision to individual chunks of text. I cannot see the entire thing at once. And if I wanted to, I could increase the speed to 325 words per minute or 350 words per minute and so on. Let's say I go crazy to 500, you can see it's much, much faster. So just something interesting to play around with there. This is very desktop friendly. You can copy paste in pretty much anything. And then spreeder.com is also great. And I think this is more app friendly as well. So maybe if you want to use it on a tablet, I'm not sure, I think you might be able to. So that's something that's worth checking out as well. And you can see they've got ebooks on there too. So you could really use anything. You could use free public domain text from Project Gutenberg. You could use, if you have the PDFs of the old LSAT exams, you could copy paste the text from those into these apps as well, which I'd highly recommend. Or you could use The Economist or Scientific American as well, if you just want dense text that's tougher than the average listicle or email that you're typically used to reading on screen. Now, any questions so far, feel free to leave them in the chat. But in the meantime, I will go on to showing you the familiarization tool on LSAC's site. This is LSAC's site, again, familiar.lsac.org. You see here they have some video tutorials that I think aren't especially useful. But on the right, they have 3 practice tests in the digital format, tests 71, 73, and 74. And these are all relatively recent. We are now at exam 87. And so these are from approximately 2013, 2014. So fairly recent, but not so new that you would want to save them for the final week or two of studying. So I want to go over now to the familiarization tool just to show you a little bit of what it looks like. And I'm going to show it to you on their tutorial over here. Let's see. So we've got some practice tutorials. This mimics the multiple choice. And notice that automatically already the countdown timer is going, even though I'm just on the directions page. They've already started the clock, and this happens with the actual digital LSAT as well on test day. And so don't treat reading the directions as free time. This time does count against your time allotted. And so you would never waste time reading the directions on the actual LSAT. Of course, you would want to jump immediately into the questions. So let's do that. So we've got a question here. This is where the stimulus would be. This is where the question stem would be. And these are the answer choices. And there are a number of features here, some useful, some not. I really like that you can flag questions to come back to later. So you see I'm flagging up here on the upper right, and it automatically puts a little flag on the bottom navigation bar here. So I can see later if I've gone on to question number 5, you see I'm on 5 now. Number 1 is still flagged, so I know I want to return to that at some point. So I think that's really the best feature of the digital LSAT on top of the countdown timer itself, which of course is great because it removes all ambiguity around, are the proctors correctly timing you or not? Are they giving you the 5-minute warning or not? And actually, at the 5-minute warning, you can no longer remove the countdown timer. But during the rest of the exam, for the first 30 minutes of any 35-minute section, you can click in the upper right and the countdown timer will disappear. But because we're less than 5 minutes remaining, it will not disappear in this instance. Some tools that I get a lot of questions about are the underlining tool and the highlighting tools. So you can see I can highlight in yellow, I can underline, I can highlight in 3 different colors, yellow, pink, and orange, but I cannot highlight in multiple colors at the same time. If I highlight the pink area in orange, it does not combine to create some new color, and I cannot underline what I've previously highlighted. Once I highlight, once I underline, it removes the highlighting. And if I go to question 4 and come back later to question 5, my annotations of highlighting and underlining still remain, just as it would if you were doing so on a paper version of the LSAT. You can also use the eraser to erase your highlighting and underlining as well, which is nice. But there's no pen or stylus on the screen. I cannot actually draw on the question itself. That is not an option here. Some accessibility features: you can increase text size to be large or extra large, and you can make it extra small as well. You can also increase the line spacing if that makes things easier for you to read. But the thing to be aware of is that if you do that, you may need to scroll down more if not everything is displaying at once on a given question. So you don't get to see everything at a glance quite so neatly. But one cool thing you can do is you can collapse answer choices to make things a little bit more concise for yourself to see what you want to see at a glance. So I could imagine this being useful if, let's say, and I'll make the line spacing the default again. Let's say that you no longer, right now for this question, even with normal line spacing, you can't see all 5 choices at once, which I think is not desirable. But let's say I had eliminated choice B. I can eliminate, which is another thing I should mention. You can cross off choices. And let's say if I'm eliminating B, I click this here. It puts a little slash through B over there, and the B becomes more faint gray text. I can then click this up arrow to collapse choice B, and now I can see more of choices C, D, and E automatically. Of course, there's no reveal answer function on the real LSAT. That's just for this familiarization tool. And so, by the way, if you're doing exams 71, 73, and 74 in the digital LSAT format, I would not recommend revealing the answer after every single individual question, because you want to train yourself and get used to not being able to see the correct answer immediately on a real test. And so that's I think, something useful to do. I've gotten some questions here about what I've been speaking about, so I'm going to take a pause here to address those. Joelle's asking, is it beneficial to block the time? I assume you're asking, is it beneficial to, for the first 30 minutes of a section, click that timer to remove it? I personally think it is. I personally find the countdown timer somewhat stress-inducing because it really turns on the heat with the time pressure and makes it ever present. And also, it's moving, it's motion, and I find that motion distracting. I think that the countdown timer is one of those tactics that scammy websites do to try and generate a quick sale. Like Groupon always has a countdown for how many minutes and seconds are remaining for a particular deal. Amazon Prime Day does that. Black Friday sites do that also. And it's meant to stress you out and force you to make a decision, which I think is not beneficial when you're looking to make considered reasoned judgments on very difficult arguments. So I wouldn't want it, but of course, your mileage may vary. Try it out. See if you like having the countdown timer or see if you find it stressful. And you can also remove it and add it back as you want to. It's your choice. But at the 5-minute warning, it's no longer your choice. In fact, a big box pops up on the screen telling you 5 minutes remaining, and you must click OK before you can actually go back to the test, because they want to make sure that you did not miss out on that important information. Now, someone's asking, does it change the formatting for one question or all the questions if you increase or decrease the line spacing? I assume that's what you're asking, or if you increase, decrease the text size. And the answer is yes, it changes it for all questions. So let's say I make question number 2 extra large. If I go on to number 4, it will still be extra large. See it? Now I'm on 4. Now I'm back on 2. It's still large. And if I make the line spacing larger or more spaced out, same happens across the board. And so these annotation or accessibility options are constant throughout the entire exam, but with just a few clicks or a few taps of the stylus, you can go back to what you wanted. So that's pretty much everything in terms of just what logical reasoning might look like, or what the logical reasoning mainly might look like. I want to show you reading comp though, because I think that's kind of interesting as well. Actually, it is a little bit different. So for reading comprehension, the big thing to be aware of is that, as they're saying here, the passage-only view and locating text references. These are two things that are unique to digital LSAT reading comp and did not happen on the paper version. Specifically, I think one of the biggest changes is that there are no longer line numbering references. You see on the left here we have the passage, and there are no line numbers at all. Whereas on paper, of course, there are line numbers throughout. You have every 5 lines, they give you a reference point. And then they'll say, in line 36, the meaning of the word anti-disestablishmentarianism means what in context. So that meaning in context for particular vocabulary words is going back to a line reference. But see here, there's no line numberings. And the reason there are no line numberings is that because of this text increasing and decreasing function and the line spacing function, the text is somewhat fluid. It's not fixed in space like it would be on a piece of paper. And so the line numberings would change as you change the text size. And so they want to remove the ambiguity or confusion around that. And so instead, they're highlighting it in the question stem here. They've highlighted it in what I think is, I'm going to call it turquoise. They've highlighted it, or cerulean blue. They've highlighted it in the question here. And then in the passage itself, they've highlighted that specific text there as well to give you a quick reference. And of course, this color is not the same color as the 3 colors that you have access to, being yellow, pink, and orange. So that's your substitution there. And so there's not really anything that you need to do differently, but you just go immediately to that particular part of the passage that they're referencing and work from there. And the line numbering is, again, not a huge deal either. What I do think is something I don't personally love is that you cannot see the entire passage at once at a glance. You have to scroll up and down here, or you can click the passage only view, which will sometimes give you a 2-page spread within the tablet, or you may have to click to the next page if the passage is spread across 3 pages or 3 columns, which it typically is, as you'll see if you look at tests 71, 73, and 74. something to be aware of. Not anything that you necessarily need to do differently, but you should be ready for it. And personally, I like to have the question and passage side by side and scroll up and down, but you should play around and see what works for you. Reading comprehension, more than any other section, is personal in nature, and it really requires some experimentation to see what you like and see what you don't like. Now, so to answer Sonia's question, the short answer is more experimentation with this and getting used to reading text on screen. So if you have access to the PDFs of the old exams, I think that's wonderful. Definitely make use of them and treat your PDFs like you cannot touch them, like you cannot draw on them. Some PDF readers, like even Mac, Preview for Mac, there are annotation functions. I would not use those because they're different in nature than the ones you'll have on the tablet. And it is different, of course, doing it on desktop than on tablet. I would get used to manually doing your work on your scratch paper on the side, maybe writing down some keywords or key phrases related to the author's opinion, to the major viewpoints, and have that be it, really. I've got a question from Meg. Do you see multiple in-text passages highlighted in the passage for all the questions? That's a great question. I think it really depends on the idiosyncrasies of what they have chosen to ask about. So it's likely that they could ask a meaning and context question for all 4 passages, or maybe for only 2. Ultimately, I think it doesn't really matter that much, in my opinion, from my perspective. It's just a particular question type that's detail-oriented. But I don't think you necessarily would need to do anything differently. In my experience, from what I can remember, some passages have those line reference or paragraph reference questions where there would be a paragraph, where there would be a highlighting reference point, as there is for question number 2 here. And in other cases, there might not be. It really varies from passage to passage, from exam to exam. But it is one particular thing to be on the lookout for, and nothing more than that. As for logic games, it will be somewhat similar in that it's more similar, I think, to logical reasoning, where you can only see one question and the rules at a time, kind of like this, where with the paragraph being a bit longer, because you're also going to have the rules over here. Then you'll have one question one by one, and you can either click the right arrows and to go back and forth, right and left over here on the bottom right, or you can click the navigation bar at the bottom. And of course, I should just show you, if you bubble B for number 5, it will be bubbled on the bottom as well. And that little vertical rectangle shows you which question you're on in the moment. So you see I've clicked over to 4. Now we're on number 4. If I flag number 4 and go to 3, now 4 is flagged and 5 is bubbled. And it also, I should mention that just as highlighting and underlining remains constant, even if you leave the question and come back later, if you eliminate certain choices, like I eliminated A, B, and C here, if I go to number 1 and back to number 3, those will still be grayed out and still be eliminated. So that's a quick general walkthrough of what the digital LSAT looks like. I'm happy to answer further questions on the format or how to prep, given that it is on a tablet. Like I said, you don't need to buy a Microsoft Surface Go specifically. Any old tablet will do, but I do recommend at least doing a few exams on the tablet, specifically just to get used to what it's like. I've got a question asking, do I suggest answering questions that were flagged just in case you don't have time? And my answer for this doesn't really vary whether it's the paper version or the digital version. It depends on your personal pacing. If you typically are down to the wire, if you typically run out of time without completing the entire section, I would definitely bubble things in the moment on the test. I would not wait till the end because you might not ever come back to it. The 5-minute warning is typically a good point to bubble in anything you haven't up to this point, or ideally, you have a small time bank of at least 3 to 5 minutes to go back and bubble anything you flagged. I think flagging reduces the time pressure a little bit, because instead of frantically flipping through your pages looking for what you have not completed, you can see everything you have not completed if you have flagged all of those questions. And so at the 5-minute warning, or even with a few minutes remaining, you could then go back and at least bubble in something for all of those. And there is no separate bubble sheet. All your bubbling is happening on the tablet itself, and that does save you time. I think it's awesome, actually. I think the major perks of the digital LSAT are the countdown timer removes any ambiguity around timing on the part of the proctors, which, of course, they are human, they are prone to error, and they do make lots of errors all the time. And so that removes any human error on their part. Secondly, the navigation bar at the bottom makes it easy to click around from question to question. And the flagging also makes it easy to see at a glance what you want to return to. And the bubbling probably saves you, on average, 2 minutes. Instead of bubbling those circles with the number 2 pencil on the Scantron, slowly filling them in bit by bit, you're with one click, one tap of the stylus, it's done. So I think that's awesome. Now, yes, your answers are locked in. Once you've selected your bubbles, that's it. You're done. Once the countdown timer reaches 0, everything is finished. What you've bubbled is done. Done is done. That's it. There's no other submission you need to do. The other thing I should mention is that you automatically are moved from section 1 to section 2 to section 3 immediately. There is no short break where they're saying, put down your tablets, pick up your tablets. Like on the paper LSAT, you did have about 5-10 seconds where they're saying, stop and then start. Digital LSAT, it's seamless, one section to the next. Your only break, your only breathing room is between sections 3 and 4, just as it was on the paper LSAT. Other questions here. Can you look at all the questions for the logic games on one page or only one at a time? Just to recap on that, with reading comp and with games, you can only see one question at a time. You have to flip between them. On the reading comp, you do have the passage in the left column if you want to choose that view. And with games, you will still see the paragraph and the rules on the left column as well, but you cannot see the entire grouping of questions at once. And if there are any links you missed, just email me and I'll share them again later if you missed anything. Now, I did get some questions submitted from students related to digital LSAT. So the tablet, is it flat on the desk or can you prop it up? There is a little kickstand. You can prop it up. You can't, there's a certain limitation on how much you can prop it up, but you can prop it up to some extent, and it's your choice if you want to have it flat or not. Next question I got was, is it more time consuming to do it on scratch paper versus going back and forth between the scratch paper and the screen, especially with games? That's a great question. I personally kind of like it because you have more space. You have multiple pages if you want. You can organize everything on a full sheet, 8.5 by 11. So it's really up to you as to your personal preference. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to practice. It is what it is. And so whether it's more time consuming or not, you've got to take it and run with it. But yeah, that is a major complaint I get from students actually, that going back and forth between scratch paper and the screen is something to get used to. But I also hear from folks that they love digital. We're children of the digital age. A lot of folks are growing up with internet, with tablets, with smartphones, and with computers, certainly. And so it might feel a little bit easier and a little bit more intuitive to do things with digital and your 12 to 14 page booklet separately. And so that's just something to be aware of. I think reading comprehension is a little bit tougher, honestly. I don't love that you can only see part of the passage at a time, or you can't see the passage and question simultaneously. But again, it is what it is. I don't want to just complain about it or say I don't love it, because I think it is mixed. It's not all good or not all bad. I think the biggest issues are honestly the technical kinks LSAC had in July with tablets not being charged or proctors not having the stylus. And so honestly, of course, there's not much you can do about that. It is what it is. And so have in mind that there may be a tech snafu, be ready for it, and know that you may need to retake, and that's okay. Law schools do not average multiple scores. They only take the highest. And so if you're taking it in September, maybe consider registering for October or November as well. And if you're taking October, register for November as well. And I know that you don't want to have to take the LSAT more times than you were planning, but there is only a 4 to 5 week gap in between each of these test dates. And so it's not that much additional effort to only stay fresh on the LSAT for another 4 to 5 weeks. It could just be as simple as one timed exam per week for the following 4 weeks. Now, I got a question about score release. Like I said, the July LSAT was July 15th. Scores aren't coming back until August 28th, which is approximately a 6-week gap. That is a uniquely long time period to wait. It's a uniquely long gap, and that is simply because that was the transitional exam, and LSAC loves to do detailed statistical analysis to measure and compare the results of the two formats. But going forward, it will be a more normal score release. of your standard approximately 3 weeks. And LSAC actually said on their website that it will be a shorter gap going forward for score release. They hope to release results faster with the digital LSAT. There are not really any specific promises on this, but it's something to look forward to, especially if you're taking the LSAT in 2020 in January or March or beyond. As for using stylus versus your finger, it's your preference. I think honestly, there's not really much of a difference. If you are good at flipping around from pen to stylus, it could be easier and more precise to use the stylus. Or if you like your finger, do that. This is, again, something personal and something to be practicing on your own for at least an exam or two to see what it's like using the digital LSAT familiarization tool. Got another question here on what happened with tech snafus back in July. Yes, some tablets did run out of battery. Did proctors solve the problem, or did people lose time? It's one of those things where proctors are only human. They're not perfect. And in some cases, they couldn't really solve it perfectly or ideally. In other cases, they did have extra tablets available to sub in. But I think things will on average be slightly better in September and beyond, because LSAC will hopefully have learned something from how July went. But I still don't expect things to be perfect in September. I think they will get better with time, like anybody, like any organization or any individual trying something new. They will get better with time. So I think November will be the best digital exam this year, with October being slightly worse and September being a little bit worse than that. But I'm not expecting it to be awful. And again, it is what it is. Nothing much you can really do about it. Just make the best of the situation. Let's see. I think there was a question earlier that I didn't fully address. Scrolling back through the chat here. But if you have other questions, please feel free to ask, because I've said a lot here and I don't want to just have me talking about what I care about. I want to answer your questions too. Another thing, the writing sample. Yeah, so the writing sample, thanks for bringing that up. The writing sample has gone digital. June was the first case where it went digital. You are no longer doing the writing sample at the test center. You're doing it on your own time afterwards from your own device, from your own computer. So you're doing on test day, you're just doing the 5 LSAT sections, your games, your 2 logical reasonings, your reading comp, and your experimental, and that's it. The writing sample you can do later that day, later that week, a month from then. You have up to 1 year to complete the digital LSAT writing sample. And the only thing is that they will not release your score to law schools until you have completed at least 1 writing sample. If you have previously taken the LSAT, whether paper or digital, you're done. You don't need to ever do the writing sample again unless you want to pay the $15 and do it again, which I don't really know why you would. So they will give you your score back regardless of whether you've done the writing sample or not, but they will not give it to law schools until you have done a writing sample. The writing sample is done from your computer within your LSAC account. They monitor you with a webcam and a microphone for security purposes to make sure that it's really you, but that's pretty much it. It is timed 35 minutes, just like before. The content is the same, only the format has changed, just like the digital LSAT itself. Content's the same, only the style in which it's delivered has changed. I think it's also great because you can type rather than writing by hand. Most people's handwriting is terrible these days because we're not used to it anymore, and typing is more legible, which means that that law schools will perhaps take the writing sample more seriously than they did previously, because it's easier to read. They're more likely to look at it if it's easier for them to read. But again, it's really only one of those things where it could hurt you, not help you. The writing sample is not going to get you into law school. But if you do a terrible job on it, it could pull you out of the running. So take it seriously. And if you're a non-native English speaker, of course, give special attention to it, because the biggest reasons they're using the writing sample is to see, are you proficient in English, if you're a non-native speaker in particular, and if your grades in college in English were terrible, if you're not a good writer, if you're just not that literate and don't have a good vocabulary, the writing sample is a way for them to see, do you really have the ability or not? And so if your grades were a bit low in college, the writing sample is your chance to show that you actually are good at writing and your college writing was not reflective of your true abilities. And so because you're typing it, you might complete it faster than you would have otherwise. So maybe use that extra time to proofread, check your spelling, check your punctuation, check your grammar. I don't think they have any of those functionalities in the the digital writing sample. And so it's worth reading through it to double check that you've done your best possible writing. Use the full 35 minutes and take it seriously. But nothing more to say on it really than just that you cannot do the writing sample at the test center, though you can only do it from home or the library or wherever you bring your laptop. All they ask is that you do it in a quiet environment, that you be the only one in the room, and that you show them with your webcam that there's nobody else around to help you and no other resources available to help you as well. And that's pretty much it. But any old computer should do, as long as it's relatively up to date and using a modern browser. They have some troubleshooting tools on their site to help you make sure that you're doing it properly. And you can take it anytime, 24/7, 365. I assume they're not monitoring you live with somebody else on the other end watching you physically. I think it's more that they're simply saving a recording of you in case they wanted to check for security purposes later. There is one other thing I wanted to show you here, which was on LSAT's site. They actually have a pretty good FAQ section where they're giving general overviews, and I'll put the link in the chat here as well. It's all about the digital LSAT. This is actually accessible on their homepage pretty easily, which is nice. They have an ever-growing Q&A section here. You see the FAQ, and it's much longer than it used to be. They're covering lots and lots of questions, and you see here, September LSAT, they're releasing the results October 14th, and they expect to release them even faster on future exams. And so lots of good questions they're addressing here, things to be aware of. And so definitely visit this page if you want to know more on digital, specifically straight from the horse's mouth. And so, yeah, the scratch paper, 12 to 14 pieces of paper total. All I've heard from them, and they are strangely ambiguous about this. They don't want to commit to a number. For the scratch paper, they're giving you 12 to 14 pages approximately. At one point, when I emailed them, they said that. Another point, they refused to commit to a hard and fast number. But that's the amount they're giving you. I say that it's probably more than enough, but it's not unlimited. So just keep that in mind. Got a question on the practice tests on LSAC's site. Are they real? Yes, they are tests 71, 73, and 74. They are real, released, previously administered exams, and they're actually also available in the books of 10 on Amazon as well. So they're no different than actual LSAT content. They just took exams they had published in books previously and had previously given to students, and they put them in the digital LSAT interactive format. And so they're great practice. I would highly recommend using them. You could do them as full exams, but the thing to be aware of is that they are not saving your results when you bubble things in, and they are not scoring it for you either. It's meant to be simply a familiarization tool. It is not really an fully interactive test-taking tool where they score you and tell you what was right and wrong. You need to look elsewhere for that. And for the writing sample, I had a follow-up on that. You have to log on to LSAC's site. I don't know if they email you a link or not, but on your LSAC account, they will make it available to you to complete there after you've done the actual scored LSAT. Got a question here. Does the LSAT start right away now with the digital L exam? No more bubbling your name and whatnot. That used to take about 15 to 30 minutes. Great question. So back in the day with the Scantron, the paper and pencil LSAT, it would probably take at least 30 minutes to bubble in your name, your address, your social security number, LSAC account number, all that stuff. That's no longer the case. Now your tablet already has all that information preloaded, and they actually they greet you with your photo that you uploaded to LSAC's site. So it's very much like 1984 Big Brother-ish, where they already know everything about you. It's in there already. So you're starting pretty soon. They are still reading directions. They are still giving you some general rules of the road, but you're starting faster. And so you're not going to be there as long as you previously were, where you had that 30 minutes to bubble in your basic info and then another 35 to do the writing sample. So your test day has shortened quite a bit. It is pretty much now approximately 3 to 3.5 hours with your 5 35-minute sections, and not too much more than that other than the break and any housekeeping stuff, tech issues aside. So back to the scratch paper, how to follow up on that. It's a booklet. It's a booklet with staples and that newsprint I sent you earlier. You're going to have that booklet, and that's going to be it. And so you have your pencils that you bring yourself. You'll have the pen that's on the stylus. As for how early to get there on test day, I always recommend, of course, allowing extra time, getting there at least 20, 30 minutes early, just in case of any transportation issues, whether it's you're taking a train or a bus or a car or a cab, whatever it may be. Get there early, just in case, especially if you're on a college campus where it could be tough to find your actual test center sometimes. So get there early, find the room, just so that you're secure. You could bring some warm-up questions to do before you leave the test center, before you go into the test center. Bring a favorite logic game or a favorite reading comp passage or a few logical reasoning questions. They could be printouts or photocopies, and then you toss them before you enter. And I would not talk to other test takers because they could only stress you out. You never know what they're going to say, and it's not your job to comfort them or to listen to them talk about how much they know or how little they know. I would just keep to yourself before entering, and that's pretty much it. In terms of test day prep, I would suggest doing at least 10 full-length timed exams before test day total, no more than 1 or 2 a week max, so that you have sufficient time to review them. And I would do at least a couple on the digital LSAT familiarization tool site. There are also a handful more on Khan Academy as well that are online, but they are not interactive and digital in the same way as the tablet LSAT is, although I'm not really sure why. I think that if you're 5 weeks out before the September LSAT, you could spend another week or two on reviewing weak areas and individual timed sections. But for the final 4 weeks or so, I would focus on doing those full-length 5-section timed exams along with detailed review of those exams. Definitely not 3 a week. 1 or 2 a week at most, I think, would be sufficient. And that's a full-length 5-section exam, then maybe do a little bit of review later that day, and then review more the following day as well. So do a little bit of basics in the short term, then ramp up to full-length exams for that final month. And if you're not feeling ready, if you don't have enough time, I would postpone to a later test date or take multiple, take October and take November as well, so that you have more time for detailed review. And as for what that detailed review looks like, it's a number of things. It's flagging or keeping a running list of every single exam you've gotten, every single question you've gotten wrong, and every single question you've had difficulty with. And you want to see, was your misunderstanding in the stimulus for logical reasoning in terms of the method of reasoning? Was it in misidentifying the question type in the question stem, or was it in the answer choices? And so I recommend talking this out with a friend or a tutor or a coach or a study buddy, or writing it out in a notebook. That could be like your mistake journal, where you keep a log of everything you ever had difficulty with, and you're writing out where your misunderstanding stemmed from, what was the method of reasoning in the stimulus, and if your misunderstanding was in the answer choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it, and what ultimately made it wrong, what was discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately made it correct. And you want to do this again and again and again for the most difficult questions you encounter. Of course, not for every question on the exam, but for maybe the 10 to 15 per exam that you had difficulty with, whether you got them right or wrong, or you guessed and got lucky. Remember that it could have just as easily gone the other way the next time around. So I would recommend reviewing those as well. And this takes time. It takes a lot of time. It could take, if you got maybe 15 questions wrong and guess on another 10 questions, that's 25 questions to review. And spending 10 minutes per question would already be over 4 hours. And if you're spending more than 10 minutes, it takes even longer. And so this really does take a lot of time, and it's grueling, and it's not the most fun at times, but it's better to do fewer exams and review them in more depth than to do more exams and only do a surface level review. And so in terms of spacing your exams, if you are doing 2 a week, that's probably if you're studying full-time or you're only working part-time or only in school part-time. If you're working a full-time job, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, you probably won't have enough time to do 2 exams a week, especially if you are doing these exams in the evening when you're exhausted. Maybe just do 1 exam a week on the weekends and use the rest of the week for review and review and drilling weak areas and doing individual timed sections. So maybe you do one, if you are doing 2 a week, if you are studying full time, have at least one day in between, and ideally 2 days. You could do one Saturday, one Tuesday, or one Saturday and one Wednesday, and that's good spacing. Had a question about more exams being released in the digital format. LSAC has released 3 so far. There will be more in the future, but who knows when? It's really up to them. I think it'll be soon. I think they'll probably release at least 1 or 2 more in the month of September before the September LSAT, but that's just my intuition. It's my guess. I don't have any evidence to go on that. In the meantime, if you do have only, of course, these 3 exams in the digital format, what do you do to get more? And I'd say the best thing is do them on screen with the PDFs, either on your computer or if you have a tablet, loading the PDFs on your tablet and treating it like it is a screen where you can't draw on it, and just using your scratch paper on the side and not using the tools like highlighting and underlining. I should mention that those tools, although they are available to you, I don't think they're especially useful, and your mileage may vary. You could try it out and see what works for you, but I don't think that it's really worth using those annotation tools specifically. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that it's especially useful. So just something to keep in mind there. Now, I had a question about the best times to study. I would say in terms of studying, I would say do 1 exam a week on Saturdays in the morning, ideally, if your test is in the morning, then do 1 on Wednesdays or Tuesdays in the morning, or if the afternoons or evenings when you're free, do it then. Ideally, it's best to do your timed exams at the same time of day that your actual exam itself will be, just because of your biological rhythms and such. Got a question on games and reading comp. Should you move on if it's taking too long? Yeah, you don't want to get bogged down. Getting bogged down is the enemy, and that's what leads you to run out of time. So I would suggest, if you feel like you're getting diminishing marginal returns, skip it, come back to it later, flag it, and trust that you will be able to come back. And if you can't come back, hey, that's okay too. I mean, I think that it's not the end of the world if you skip a tough question and instead you end up having time to do an easier question. It's really about what's going to lead you to getting the most questions correct in the end. And maybe that involves cutting your losses sometimes. And that's just, it is what it is. It's not ideal, but very few people get perfect scores. They get perfect 1As with 0 questions wrong. And so you have to know what are your weak areas. Maybe it's a lengthy parallel question. Maybe it's a curveball logic game. Maybe it's a science-y reading comprehension passage. Whatever it is for you, know your weak areas and work with them. Just work on and focus on what's best for you. Got a question on admissions. Interesting. I'm happy to address that too. So how important is your GPA? Can a 3.2 GPA still be okay? Depends on where you want to go, and depends on what your goals are. It depends on what your LSAT score is too. If you have a low GPA, whether it's 3.2 or 2.9, if you have a 175, that'll still open a lot of doors. Law schools may have some concerns about your academic abilities, your academic performance. That would make you a splitter, high LSAT, low GPA, which could raise concerns for them. But law school admissions is a numbers game. The admissions index is that unique combination of LSAT and GPA. So it might be okay in the end. Your GPA ultimately probably is what it is. I'm guessing if you're thinking about the LSAT, thinking about law school, you probably are at the very least a junior or a senior in college, or you've graduated already. And so your GPA is pretty fixed, but your LSAT score is the biggest thing you can change at this point. And so it is what it is. Make the best of it. Get the best LSAT score possible. And that's what I'm here to help you do. It's what I talk about in my YouTube videos, in my podcasts, and my courses as well. And the courses, although the earlier material is focused on building the foundation, the masterclass recordings are focused on digital LSAT prep specifically, where I'm walking through digital LSAT questions, playing around with the format, the annotation tools a bit as well. And so go there for more if you want details on how to prep for digital specifically. Got a general LSAT question that I will address. If you're at a plateau with your LSAT prep, it could mean that you're burned out, in which case it's worth taking a break. Or maybe it's worth changing your approach. If there's a resource that you've been thinking about getting or using, but you haven't yet already, maybe it's time to make the investment in that resource, whether it's a book or a course or coaching or tutoring or finding a study partner, whatever it is. think about how to maximize your prep, how to bring it to the next level. Because when you're stuck in a plateau, what you need is to see what are your blind spots? What are you missing? What could propel you to make that breakthrough in your understanding? And so it could be getting a new book, getting a new course, getting a study partner, getting a coach, whatever you're considering, whatever you think could help you, make the investment, because just a single point more on the LSAT could lead to getting thousands of dollars more in scholarship money, or getting into a better law school, or getting off the wait list from a law school. And so that's why retaking is so important, why retaking is so worthwhile, because a retake through luck alone could get you 2 or 3 points more on the LSAT, because there is a margin of error or a score band of 3.5 points on either end. And so even if your true aptitude is a 160, let's say, you could take it in September, get a 160, and then through retaking in October, just by staying fresh on the LSAT for another 4 weeks or 5 weeks, you could get a 163 or 164, and that will make a major difference in your admissions chances. And so it is worth retaking. It is worth making the investment in that resource if you think it could help you do better next time around. And so breaking through a plateau always involves doing something differently and taking a break potentially as well. So I talked about earlier about detailed review. That is a really important part of the study process, and it is often the most overlooked. I recommend a 5-stage approach to LSAT studying, and that's what my study schedules are based upon as well. And I'll share a link to those as well. And in the courses, I also have detailed schedules that go along with the course lessons as well. So if you haven't gotten one, I've reached out to you, but if you haven't gotten it, please email me and I'll send it over to you. These schedules have a 5-stage process that I call LASER, the LASER approach to LSAT studying. It involves learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. Learning is theory, reviewing textbooks, watching course videos, learning the theory, just getting the basics of the various question types. Next is accuracy, doing individual questions by type, drilling, untimed, just getting used to what each question type is asking for. S is for sections, doing individual timed 35-minute sections to work on your pacing. Fourth is E for endurance and exams, doing full-length 5-section timed exams. And finally, R is for review, which I talked about earlier. And so if any one of those 5 things is missing from your prep, that is holding you back, and you need to take a step back and focus on this. A lot of students jump straight to exams because they want to see the results, and they do exam after exam, and they think they're reviewing, but they're not. If you're not doing the kind of review that I talked about, where you're articulating it, writing it out, looking for the patterns in the unique tricks and traps that you're falling for in terms of tempting wrong answers or discouraging right answers or confusingly worded question stems or densely worded methods of reasoning in the stimulus, you're not doing enough. You've got to integrate that into your prep. You've also got to do all the previous stages as well, especially learning theory first with the learning phase of the prep, and then gradually building up to the full-length exams with questions by type, then individual sections. And so make sure you're going through that process in order. My study plans incorporate that. My courses incorporate that as well. Got a final question from Arabella here, and then I'll leave off for tonight if nothing else. Arabella's asking, if I want to score at least a 170 on the test, but I'm at 165 consistently right now, could I get to 170 in time for September, or should I change my test date? Right now, you've got over 5 weeks till September. That is enough time to improve 5 points. The question is, what will you do between now and then to make it happen? What haven't you been doing now? Because if you're at 165 consistently now, to me that says you're at a plateau. You need a breakthrough. And so think about, what insights have you gotten from our session tonight from this class? What could you incorporate into your prep? What could you be doing differently? Integrate those changes into your prep. Make a change in terms of strategy or theory, depending on where you're struggling, and experiment. You have time to experiment. You have enough time over the next 5+ weeks to try something out at least a couple of times and see how it works for you. And then from there, make that change or not. But I guarantee you that there is something you could be doing differently between now and then that will help you get there. And the key is just figuring out what it is. Of course, we haven't worked together. I don't know your situation, but most people in my experience are taking too many exams and not spending enough time reviewing. So consider whether that might apply to your situation and make the change if necessary. If nothing else, I will leave off here for tonight. I want to thank you all for coming and investing in yourselves on this Tuesday summer evening. And please feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. Reply to my emails, reach out to me. I'm here for you. In the meantime, as always, I wish you all the best with your prep and take care. Have a good evening, everyone. Good night. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.